How and why did you decide to write an anti-Islamic book? How was your life in regards to faith? What did you believe in? What was your heaviest and most regretful expression that you used for Islam? What was the reaction of the people around you when you became Muslim?
I thought to myself, Islam is a lie. Islam is a danger. I got over 2,000 death threats. And in the end, I decided to write an anti-Islam book. God, give me a sign so that I 100% sure know this is the way. I couldn't sleep for it for 2 days. I couldn't accept it. It was so strange.
Assalamu alaikum, brother Joram Van Klaveren. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and we are happy to have you with us. I want to first ask you, who is Joram?
Walaikum salam, Ahmed. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a great honor for me to be here. Joram Van Klaveren was born on January 23 in 1979 in Amsterdam, in a pretty regular family, father, mother, brother, another brother, younger, a sister, a cat. In Amsterdam, I was born and raised there. We're a practicing Protestant family. After I finished high school, I studied comparative religion. I was a teacher for a few years. There happened a lot of things in the Netherlands, especially in my life. Also, when I look at the bigger picture when it came to Islam, I became politically active for the Freedom Party. I became a member of parliament. And in the end, I decided to write an anti-Islam book, which started as an anti-Islam book, changed into this search for God, and it ended up me becoming a Muslim.
How was your life in regards to faith? What did you believe?
This is definitely a lot better, even so far, than that other video we watched where it was someone narrating on his story.
Yes, well, obviously hearing right from the source is going to be better.
How was your life in regards to faith? What did you believe in?
Before I was a Muslim, I was a Protestant Christian from the Reformed Church. We read from the Bible, we all got biblical names, we were all baptized, we went to church, etc., etc. So we're pretty Christian in that way, in that sense. Of course, I believed that there is a creator. I believed in heaven, hell. I believed in angels, revelations. And of course, what separates the Christians from the Muslims is that I believed that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. In a more philosophical way, I believed he was God himself, of course. I believed in the resurrection and crucifixion of Christ, of course. And I believed in the atonement. But because the Trinity is a very complex concept, whether you believe it or not, it's still very complex. Because if there is a God in the Bible, it says God is eternal. But if you are eternal and you die, you cannot be eternal, immortal at the same time. So that was something when I was a little older, 16, 17, I started questioning things like that. It's not very logical. And I talked to many priests, preachers, even rabbis, and the answers I got weren't very satisfying. That made it, for me, kind of complex. And in the end, I had some doubts about stuff like this. But I said, well, I set it aside and I thought, okay, I just believe it, and perhaps I'm not smart enough to get the whole picture. And
Interesting, because that's how I definitely feel, like a lot of people feel about the Trinity and stuff, is that they're just like not smart enough and it's like kind of beyond their comprehension. But then when you really think about it, does that fully make sense? Because like, wouldn't you rather have something that clicks in your head? Or am I missing something? Do you know what I'm saying?
I do, but I also don't think that we are necessarily capable of understanding all things about God.
I agree. I totally agree there.
So it doesn't bother me.
Okay.
I still believed in God. I still believed that Jesus was a very important person. I believed he was the Son of God, but how it exactly was, I left it for what it was.
How and why did you decide to write an anti-Islamic book?
After high school, I went to university and I did comparative religion. And the remarkable thing, I think, was that the first day of me going to college was September 11, 2001. Already thought, okay,
That's
these Muslim
crazy.
guys are kind of crazy, and this religion isn't the truth. Then a few years later was this guy in the Netherlands called Theo van Gogh. He was a famous filmmaker and he was killed in the street. He was shot and they tried to slit his throat and they put a knife in his stomach with a letter on it for another girl, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. And it said, "You are next." So it strengthened my anti-Islam feelings in such a way that I thought, well, I have to become politically active to do something and stop this evil of harming our country.
You started politics because of Islam.
Yeah, and that really had to do with Islam. That was the reason that I wanted to write a book too.
It really is like insane how like the mass perception really is like terrorism and women don't get rights and stuff like that. It's wild.
really had to do with Islam. That was the reason that I wanted to write a book, to explain to people why Islam was a danger for the world. When I was writing my book, like I said earlier, the questions, the doubts I had about Christianity popped up again. And that was about truth, of course, because I was a believing Christian guy. And yeah, the Christian questions I had in the end were answered in an Islamic way. Because, of course, when I started writing the book, a lot of people think that it was a political book. But it wasn't so much a political book, it was a religious book, because I wanted to show people why Islam was a danger as a religion, and I wrote it from a Christian perspective. So in the beginning, I made a comparison between the Christian concept of God and the Islamic concept. So I started comparing it. But because I had these doubts about the Trinity, and I saw Tawheed, the oneness of God in Islam, I thought, yeah, it sounds a little bit more logical. And then I thought to myself, well, I reread the Bible to refresh myself, to see, okay, why isn't the concept of Islam, the Tawheed concept, isn't the Christian concept? But when I was reading the Old Testament and I saw what the Old Testament prophet said, it was one God, one God, one God. And then I thought, okay, I'll look only at the words of Jesus Christ in the New Testament. And then there's this story in the New Testament where a guy comes to Jesus and he asks him, what is the most important thing in life? How can I gain paradise? And he said there are two things. He says, hear, O Israel, hear, your God is one. Treat your neighbor as you want to be treated yourself. So I thought, well, even Jesus Christ says, hear, O Israel, your God is one. So I thought, well, this whole Muslim concept of God sounds more logical, and it's the same concept that I find in the Old and the New Testament. And
You have any thoughts so far?
I just feel like he's getting at to the same conversation I keep hearing about how I keep getting these things that Jesus never said he was God, and he did multiple times.
the New Testament. And I know Christianity as a religion teaches something else, but it isn't the concept of God that I find in the Bible. So after weeks and weeks of study,
He missed a lot then, reading the Bible. It is very much in there where he said he is the law of Moses, and he refers to prophecies that were fulfilled. And that's part of the reason that he was killed, is because he said he was God and he was one with God. So, I mean, to say that he never said that, or that he wasn't that and he wasn't clear about that, is simply just to ignore facts.
Rereading all kinds of books, I thought to myself, okay, perhaps this oneness of God is something that is true. So that's how it started.
What resources did you use while doing your research?
Because I was kind of shocked, I started writing to several authorities on these religious matters. And one of the guys that I wrote to was Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, and he's a professor from Cambridge University. But in a way, it was kind of strange, of course, because I was a politician back then still. I was writing an anti-Islam book with an anti-Islam purpose. And I'm asking this Muslim professor from another country, can you help me? So I told him, I'm writing a book. I have a lot of questions. So I was very plain why I thought, why is Islam promoting terrorism? Why is anti-woman? Why is anti-Christian? Anti-whatever. After, I think, 6 weeks, he sent me a very extensive email. And he started explaining, directly answered a lot of my questions. But he also told me, you have to read this article, read this book, read that book, ask this person. And so he was very extensive in his way of explaining. But in the end, after I read all these books and articles and made a comparison between prophets from the Old Testament with Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, I had no arguments anymore to say they are prophets and he is not. And I thought to myself, well, if I accept Moses on these grounds and I cannot accept the prophet, then there is something else. So I thought, why don't I think he is a prophet? And I thought, oh, perhaps because he had many wives. But then again, when you look at Solomon...
Why couldn't Jesus be the son of God and Muhammad also be a prophet? I can't wrap my head around why that is so hard for people to comprehend, that just because a prophet came after Jesus, that he's the only prophet that we should listen to. At any point in time, anybody could have believed that. And, through all the prophets in the Old Testament, at any point, they could have been like, okay, we're done. We got a prophet. We got the message now. We're good. Apparently, anyone else that comes is no longer valid. And that is not what they did.
God said he was the last prophet, right?
Muhammad said that.
Oh, Muhammad said that God...
Well, I'm sure we'll be corrected on this,
Yeah.
but the argument that we get is, or the logic that we get is, that he is the last prophet.
But all the previous prophets, no one thought that was the last one. Like, there was no message about there being a last one. Or do you know anything about that?
No, I don't know anything about that.
It's pretty crazy.
And I don't know that Jesus ever said that. Like, why would I don't think he ever said that. Why wouldn't God send, one of the things, I think it was in the conversation with Ali Dawah, when he was saying that if Jesus was God, why he wouldn't have to send any more prophets after that. And I disagree with that. I feel like God would continue to send prophets because we are so constantly, as a human race, falling off track more than ever, I think, because we're so caught in materialism and ourselves and fame and whatever nonsense that we're caught up in, TikTok, that we need another prophet. We need someone to come down and get real with us.
It is really crazy. Like, thinking about God is just like something.
Yeah.
It is crazy to think about.
It is crazy to think about, but when you
because
think
you
about
can't even
it,
conceptualize like what God looks like or anything like that. And we're saying like God, as in, God is like this being, is like sending people down to give us a message, but we can't even like visualize what God is. And it's like it is like it's a wild thought,
because we're using our tools for learning and understanding to understand something that just it doesn't fit into that paradigm.
It's crazy because like even the way like we learn language, and like when you're asked like who are you, and you're like, I am Sonny, and it's like, no, that's not who you are. Like, that's the name you were given. That's not who you are. You're not. And are you this body? Is that what you are? No, that's not what you are. Like, there's so much more to it. But like, that's where I get into the Matrix, and I've been looking, is like it goes so much deeper than just like the Tate and like the controlling stuff. Like, I genuinely think there's people at the top who know like so much more about like not even mind control, but just like if you wire people in a specific way, they won't be able to see things about the world that you would be able to see if you just grew up naturally. Am I making sense, or do I just sound crazy?
Yeah, no, obviously, yeah, absolutely, you're making sense. I mean, that's
because
just
like I said,
your
and like the
environment
three
is gonna
Muslims
shape
made
you.
a good point where they said like, what are your goals? And I said, to be financially independent and free. And they're like, that makes sense that you're saying that, growing up in a liberal capitalist society. Like, in a Muslim society, those people's main focus would to be as good of a Muslim as possible.
Well, religion, I people, when I talk about that I'm going to church and I'm really, studying the Bible now and I'm getting into it, they will say, I had a bad experience with the church. And, you really have to think about
the church isn't God.
The church is not God. And the church is not a relationship with God. The church is a way to potentially gain a relationship with God, or a way to, have a community of like-minded people. But it really isn't. You don't need church to love God. And Jesus came in, and one of the things he taught was you don't have to be in the synagogue to have a relationship with God and to worship God. You can do that anywhere. You can do that everywhere. It was very disruptive because the synagogue and the structure of the religion at the time was extremely important.
Yeah. No, but so even like I said with that example, like even I'm trying to word this in the best way possible. So even with like the way you're taught things from a young age. So like, let's say like multiplication for an example. Like the way we're taught to do multiplication, like there's ways that you could do it more efficiently, and you could do like a lot of that math in your head, but we're taught this other way for some reason, and then that determines the way we think.
Right.
Like the way you learn like math and how to count literally determines the way your eyes like simply perceive stuff. Like, why, when you look at those books, for an example, why can't you just look at them and say, I know how many there are? You have to go 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to count them. Is that just the way we are and the way we were born? Or is that the way we were taught to count?
Right.
And the way you've been wired since you're little? Because your brain's a sponge when you're that young. You know what I mean? Like, you can pick up languages in months. So when they're putting that programming into you, like teaching, it's just forming the way your brain moves in society. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Isn't that crazy,
Well, we're
though?
taught to think. We're taught nowadays, too, to think. Young people are taught to think about themselves above all. How do you feel? What do you want? What is your truth? Who are you? We're not taught to think about how are you living in accordance with God's law? How are you living in accordance? If we all had that one aspiration as our main aspiration, to have a relationship with God and to live in accordance with these rules that were set out for us by the prophets, we would then be able to take all those other things, money, creative achievements, medical achievements, all the things that we are called to do, and look at them as God gave us gifts, and we're going to now do our best in order to fulfill them, to be those people. So that alone has taught us, that if that's not part of your ingrained in you from a child, child and what you're thinking, you have to find it on your own when you're older, or never find it. That's also an option.
It's crazy that some people do just like never touch into spirituality or even think about it. We call them NPCs, but it's like there's people who just do no self-analysis. They just go about life. They go home, they watch TV, and that's it. They don't like look themselves in the mirror.
So we have to take the long road to God then, because we then have to first start to discover ourselves and start to talk about emotional intelligence and education type of intelligence, and start understanding society. And we have to end up, if we're lucky, either some people just do nothing and just exist and run around worrying about nonsense, and some people end up taking this long road.
You know what, another crazy thing that I saw today is how like science is essentially a religion. Because like, for example, you go on your phone and you know that like you can get Wi-Fi and you can get access to the internet by being on your phone, and you know that that's technically like science, some sort of science, because you can go on your phone and directly see it. Now, how much science is there that you just can't see? It's based off of just you being told that that's science. So if you're all in on science, but there's so much stuff that you can't even see with your own eyes or understand, then doesn't that essentially make that like a religion? Like science in some sense is just like as much of a belief as religion.
I think it's a little bit different, because I think through science and
like the Big Bang, for example. The Big Bang, for example. Like, we don't know that happened. It's called the Big Bang Theory.
Well, it's still a theory, right? We've talked about that.
Yeah, but it's taught as like fact, basically. Like, everyone thinks that the world just started with Big Bang, and then you're like molecules going this to this big, and then it creates everything. Like, that's a belief in itself. So you'd rather choose to believe what humans came up with for their thesis rather than going with God.
But that's a thesis.
They're both equal beliefs, though. That's the thing, and it's crazy to think about.
Abraham, there are a lot of people in the Old Testament that had more wives. And when you look at even outside of the religious books, culturally in Europe, in Africa, Asia, everywhere, there were men with several wives for several reasons. So I thought to myself, well, that cannot be a reason either. So one by one, all these reasons fell. And then in the end, I thought, well, I have to say all of them are not prophets. But I didn't believe that, because I thought, well, the things they did, they said, the miracles that happened, etc., they were confirmed in what they said and what they did. So they are. And then I said, well, then I have to accept that Prophet Muhammad perhaps is a prophet too. So I was doubting it. So first I thought, well, it's the most evil person I know because of the history. Then I said, well, perhaps it's not that evil, but he's not a prophet. And in the end, I started doubting, perhaps he is a prophet. Yeah, that took, of course, me reading a lot of books again. And the one thing that I think was very wise of Abdul Hakim Murad to say was, he said, well, the books you read about with the anti-Islam arguments are written by non-Muslims. He said, if you want to know more about Christianity, you don't read books from atheists. You start reading the books from the Christians. Why do they believe this? What are the arguments? So he said, you have to do the same with Islam. So start reading Islamic books from Islamic teachers, from Islamic scholars, etc. And then you can see, if you compare the books on the same topic of people who are Muslim and wrote those books and non-Muslim, you can see where they took the wrong turn, where they translated words in the wrong way, sometimes perhaps even not on purpose, but just because they didn't know, where things are added, where things left out of it. So, and in the end, you see there's this other religion almost created because of all these things. And that's what I did. And that's what I also did with the life of the Prophet, because I read a book from Martin Links, The Life of the Prophet, based on the earliest source of Muhammad. And it was written, of course, by a convert. And his way of reasoning, his way of telling, his way of writing appealed to me, because it's culturally the same thing. How do I approach a certain topic, etc. And it was the first time that I saw him not so much as a warlord, because that's the picture I had in my mind, but I saw him as a father, and I saw him as a friend and a teacher, and so much more. And so, yeah, I saw the person and his character, and I said, well, I can say a lot, but I cannot say that this is not a good man. So his character persuaded me to read more and to want to know more.
What surprised you the most while doing your research?
The story about Hind, there was something that, like a switch, like I had to change. And it was because I thought Hind was the wife of one of the enemies, Abu Sufyan. And in a way, they gave money to kill Hamza, the favorite uncle of the Prophet. And that was what happened on the battlefield. He got killed. They even paraded with his ears and cut off his nose and horrible stuff. So the Prophet was deeply sad, of course, of what happened. And years later, he became powerful. He came in power. tower in Mecca. And then there was hints. And I was reading this book and I thought, okay, now she gets crucified or her head gets cut off or something like that.
Wait, so he was doing all this before he ever even read the Quran?
I don't know. He didn't say that. He didn't say he hadn't read the Quran yet.
But like he was going off about them promoting terrorism and stuff, and that's just like not true.
Well, there are people who do promote terrorism in the name of Islam. It doesn't mean that I don't know enough to know if Islam
I guess
really teaches that.
He just mixed those up because it's not like Islam is promoting that. Like they don't promote violence.
Well, what he's saying is that there were misinterpretations or things that were added deliberately or left out deliberately or even not deliberately, and then you end up with this misinterpreted, this twisted version of Christianity, of what Muhammad said, according to what he said. That's what he's saying. And that has happened throughout the ages in Christianity also. The church today is completely out to lunch and doesn't really, not fully, but not everybody, but to a great extent, the Christian churches around the world are completely missing the point.
Indubitably.
He says, well, I cannot look at her right now, but everybody is forgiven. And if you want to stay here and live among the Muslims, it's possible. If you don't want that, you can go. But bloodshedding is over now. And I thought to myself that she was forgiven. If you can forgive someone who kills a relative, especially a favorite uncle of you, even starts parading with parts of his body to show other people that she humiliates you and whatever you stand for, that means you have such a great character. It's very special. It's something you don't see. And that's what he did. So I thought to myself, well, it was a really special guy. And when I thought that, I thought, well, I have these arguments for him being a prophet. I see his character. I see the way he treated other people. I see how he treated his enemies. I think he is a prophet. But then I thought to myself, whoa, that's horrible, because I already accepted this oneness of God, and now I say he is a prophet. If I say there is only one God and Muhammad is his prophet, that's almost shahada. So I thought to myself, okay, let's close the books.
If there's only one God, why couldn't that God send another prophet? One of the things we talked about with Ali Dawah, that he was very intense, that God is, all powerful, all knowing, and he could get himself out of any situation, and then he would never debase himself by coming down to earth and being immortal. And I think the fact that he did that reinforces the fact that he is all powerful and all loving, and he could do anything. And if he he could choose to say, I'm going to come to earth, send a son in earthly form who can get my message across in a way that people will understand. And Jesus is like extremely relatable as a human being, and he made God so accessible, and that's. They'll say, no, God wouldn't do that. And I'm like, who are you to say what God wouldn't do? Doesn't make sense to me. Doesn't add up. Don't put limits on what God would do.
You know what I like about Muslims is they pray 5 times a day. I like that. It's like meditation.
Right. And
that's like so important for your brain. Like you've even said strong Christians pray. They start their morning with prayer. Is that in the Bible that you're supposed to pray throughout the day?
I don't know. I haven't gotten that far. But Jesus taught us the Our Father.
Yeah.
And we are supposed to pray that every day.
When Muslims pray,
we are supposed to pray before we eat. So there are multiple prayers in a Christian's life throughout the day. It's not that different.
Yeah, I think they're really similar. Like I do, it's essentially the same God, and they are really similar. They're both like, if you follow the books religiously, it's like it's good for you. Like I said, like when I make my curriculum for my kids, where I have the Trojan horse for every single problem that I think they need, it's like if you follow religion, you get that. Be like praying 5 times a day, like that's staying in touch and like keeping your brain not fried and stuck on this nonsense, which is not like,
if you follow scripture and prophecy and not religion.
Indubitably.
We have to be careful with the word religion because it's been destroyed by human beings.
This is going in the wrong direction. And of course, I wasn't that anti-Islam anymore because of what I read, what I saw, and what I experienced. What I tell you now, it sounds a little like a fairy tale, but it really happened. In the end, there were all these books at the table, and when I had this feeling of, this is Shahada in a way, I thought, well, I put all the books away, and I put the books on the highest shelf, but there were so many books that a lot of books fell off the shelf. And one of the books that fell off the shelf was the Quran. And when I picked it up, my hand was on a page with Surah 22, Ayat 46. And it says, it's not the eyes that are blind, but the hearts. And I thought to myself, that really is my problem, because it wasn't the eyes. I really could see what I written down myself. Nobody forced me to write this book. Nobody said you have to write this or that. I started writing myself, and I could see it with my own eyes, but I still couldn't accept the fact that I said he is a prophet, there is this one God. I just couldn't. So it wasn't my eyes that were blind, but it was really my heart. I couldn't accept it. I think my nafs or whatever, my ego, I couldn't accept it. And I said, well, God, I don't care if it's the God from the Bible or the Quran, give me a sign or something so that I 100% sure know this is the way. And I went to bed, but when I woke up, I felt very secure in myself. I really felt very secure. I've never been more secure about anything else. The whole anxiety or the whole doubting issue, it disappeared. Like,
I love those stories where mass like crazy coincidence stories where it's like he opened the book is the only book that fell off the shelf, and then the page he opens to, and then where his finger is, and that's like the oh my God. But that happens with like so much stuff. Like, I'm not saying that's just an Islamic thing.
If you start
like
doing what he did and
God,
and sincerely asking God to help you solve a problem, those things happen all the time.
Isn't that wild though?
Like all the time.
No, I know you're not wrong.
It just unfolds. He wants us to ask him for help.
It's actually insane.
It's pretty awesome, actually.
There's so many stories like that, like mass coincidences. It's crazy.
Right, and you could just write them off as coincidences.
No, I know, but I'm not calling them coincidences.
No, I mean, somebody could very easily write them off as coincidences, but a believable...
Brokey mentality.
Well, no, I don't want to insult people who are,
No, that doesn't even mean financially broke. That means like...
I know what you mean. I know what you mean. I don't want to insult people who have not come to it yet, because what I find is, or I found in my own life, is that I felt like there were so many times throughout my entire life where I felt the presence of something bigger, and I had a really moving moment, and I left it behind, and I knew there was something real there, but I left it behind and got caught back up in my world and my shit. And there were people who came into my life at different times who tried to bring me closer to God, and I just kept ignoring them. And then there was a time when all of a sudden I was ready for the message, and I took it, and it's taking over my whole life in the best possible way. So I don't want to insult people who haven't come to it yet, and the idea, calling them
I mean, it's not a
brokies.
bad thing though. Like, you had the brokey mentality at one point.
No, but it's not.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not.
Right.
Don't you think you're just? I my bad.
No, I guess what the thing is that I'm learning is, if you go to all the teachings of Jesus, that he's just said, pray for people, pray that their hearts of stones turn to a heart of flesh, and pray that, actually, I don't know if that was Old or New Testament, to be perfectly honest. I think it was New. Pray for them that God finds them and touches their heart. Pray for your enemies when they're hurting you, instead of hating them. Pray for them and show them love, and that's how we get people out of that, because many of us are born with those blinders on, really.
Shit. Yeah.
That's what happens. We have blinders on until we don't.
What was the reaction of the people around you when you became Muslim?
most of them were very negative, of course. For a lot of people, especially some uncles and aunts, it was kind of a shock. They heard it when it was on the news. I told my mother, and my mother started crying. And my wife was pretty
I can't
open.
imagine
Yeah.
what this was like for him to go from Christianity and then say I'm becoming a Muslim, because as a born and raised Catholic, as you know, I consider myself a cultural Catholic. I am getting pushback from friends and family on going deeper into religion. Like, all of a sudden I have a relationship with God, with Jesus, that I never had before, and it's not just about phoning it in and showing up for the sacraments. And I am starting this Bible, this seminary class in 2 weeks, and I'm getting weird reactions from it. So I'm getting pushback, and I'm getting the you're
from the religion you legit grew up being.
From the religion
Imagine you became
right. Imagine I left it and became Muslim, which has this terrible reputation. So even among Christians within Christianity, I'm being kind of marginalized for becoming more Christian.
It's not cool.
It's so strange.
No,
so
it's
this had to be
insane.
really kind of scary, because I was over Christmas when I was home, when we were up visiting Boston, I talked a little bit about this with my pastor, and I said it's really lonely. It feels really lonely to have something become so important in my life, so meaningful and powerful to me, and not be able to talk about it with the people that I've been closest with for my whole life, because they don't want to talk about it. They think it's weird, and that sucks.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It feels like I have to work really hard to not talk about it that much, and continue to foster the relationships that matter to me in the way that I always have, even though some of the things we talk about aren't as important to me, or I see them through a whole different lens. So this guy, I can't even imagine what that did to his relationships. I'd like to hear more about it. He said his wife was cool about it. I mean, even with you, like if I have a song on or something, you'll be like, oh, the Jesus music. And I'm like, yeah, this is what's making me better. It's like making fun of somebody who's fat and they're eating a salad. Like, why are you eating the salad? What's that going to do for you? When they're trying to change their life, like in any sort of way, making fun of somebody for trying to do something that's going to fulfill them and make them a happier person.
Oh, here, I remember what I was going to say. When I was back home hanging out with friends and there was like a bunch of kids and like we started talking about my YouTube and they're like, so what's up with like the Muslim videos? Like, what's up with that? As like a joke. And I'm like, I mean, bro, like a quarter of the population is Muslim and to devote their lives to it. You don't think that's like something that you should probably learn about? Like you're on this planet for 90 years. Like, doesn't hurt to like look into it. And, like,
right.
Like what? Like I'm getting like made fun of for like looking into it because it's like such a weird connotation. It is really
And if people
really
are saying
strange.
that to your face, like, what are they saying behind, our backs? Like, oh God, they're getting what are they getting weird?
Who knows?
And that sucks. It sucks to be marginalized.
But I don't care.
But when I like where I'm going and what I'm becoming a part of is so fantastic. And the people that I'm finding people now that I can have these conversations with, and they're such beautiful conversations and they're so fun for me, that I'm okay with it. But it's not easy.
Cool about it. She said, well, if Islam is what you really believe and that's in your heart, who am I? And yeah, some people from my old work were really aggressive. I got over 2,000 death threats from people who used to support me, of course, people who voted for me. People said the most horrible things. We will rape your wife, shoot.
That's always the worst. And it's crazy to see when you're like close with somebody and then you go and make a different decision. That's not like, it's not bad or it's not like malintentioned. Like that's not bad intentioned at all. You're just doing your own thing and then those people like completely switch up on you. Like I remember back in like the first like online program that I joined, the Forex one, which was like ultimately like a pyramid scheme, MLM, and like you're in there and inside you feel like everyone's like, we're family, yada yada yada, like you're my brother now, like like we're doing all this, and it's like you're learning about finance and stuff together and building mentality, and then you leave and it's just like you just get like middle fingers from all of them, and it's like it's just weird how it's like you were like trying to call me brother and like being like all like that, and then you just I don't know, it was real, and then
just hating on me,
and then there's haters, and then you never speak again. It's just
it just goes to show how insincere that love is.
Yeah, no, it was crazy though. I've learned so much about people and everything in the last couple of years. I'm so grateful for all the lessons I've learned. It's been wild.
Where your children go to school, stuff like that. And most of them, of course, is nonsense because they're crazy people writing things on their computer. So it was kind of a hectic time. And I had to tell my work, of course, and it was this Christian organization. So to say that the leader of the pack, he said, I can't believe it. And he said, well, I noticed this change when you talked about certain topics on radio. You were kind of a little more mild, not so harsh anymore, but you becoming a Muslim. And after I said, yeah, I became Muslim, he said, I couldn't sleep for it for 2 days. I couldn't accept it. It was so strange. But the hardest part for me was telling my grandfather, because my grandfather was dying and he was 93, 94 years old, and he was on his deathbed at home. I had to tell him, and my mother told me, yeah, you have to tell your grandfather. It was her father. So I said, well, then you have to come with me. It's got like a shield. And I just said, well, grandfather, I became a Muslim. And then he closed his eyes. And I thought he stopped breathing because, he was so old. And he really stopped breathing for a while. And then he started breathing again. And he looked at me and he said, well, at least you didn't become a Catholic. So it was very funny. The last thing, my old boss from the radio, he said, well, how do we know that you're not becoming Hindu one day or something else? And I told him, well, I never chose a religion. One time, and it was when I became a Muslim. Before that, I didn't choose my religion. I was born in a Christian family. I was raised in a Christian way. And I'm very grateful for all the good things that it brought me. But it was not my decision. And the only time I made a decision was me becoming a Muslim. And it was the most, like I said, I think the most important decision I made, and it was the most rational decision I made. I never took years and years to decide one thing, only becoming a Muslim.
How did you feel when you made your first Salah?
It's, of course, a beautiful moment, but very strange as well. Because as a Christian, you're not used to pray like that. You pray with your hands together and perhaps on your knees in front of your bed or something. But I think it's very beautiful that you really prostrate, so you really bow down in the deepest way for your Lord. So that's a very humbling, beautiful thing, I think. And that, yeah, it made me feel very happy.
What were the 3 biggest challenges you faced when you converted to Islam?
Well, becoming a Muslim, of course, was a big challenge because I had to tell the world and family, and that was a big challenge. The part of thinking that it would be very hard to become a Muslim, because especially as a Protestant Christian, there aren't so many things you have to do in a religious sense. As a Muslim, in terms of practice, so it is required to pray 5 times a day. It's required to eat in a certain way. It is required to think in a certain way. You have to be the best in a way every moment because of your relation with your Creator, and because of the fact that you have to pray 5 times a day. It's a constant reminder in a way of the Creator, so that makes you much more aware of the fact that you have a Lord than as a Christian. That's how I experience it. And I thought to myself, whoa, 5 times a day praying, I cannot do this, I cannot do that, I have to do so that made it hard in the head. But after I became Muslim, it wasn't hard at all.
You know what? I was gonna, let me go first because I don't want to forget. I'm not the smartest guy. You know how when let's say you're making like $1,000 a week, and the brokies, they'll just go and they'll spend that whole 1,000, and I'm like, you know that if you took even like 200-300 of that and you just put it somewhere else and didn't touch it, your lifestyle would stay exactly the same.
Yeah.
Exactly the same. So that's like a really interesting point that he made, where he's like, oh, well, pray 5 times a day. Like, I have stuff to do. It's like, dude, once you start doing it, it's not a problem at all. Your life realistically does not stay the same, but you're not like losing time. That like everyone,
it's not that big of a loss.
If anything,
yeah.
you're losing time doing dumb stuff. Like you're not
and
scrolling on Instagram as much. You're getting more in touch with reality, and then your time is better focused on important things.
And
like
you're
all
gaining,
of us, like
you're gaining.
Exactly. Like all of us, like we scroll on social media, and it's like, what are we looking at? Like, what are we gaining? It's just nonsense. It's complete garbage. And then we're here complaining about how we don't have time. It's like, bruv, you have so much time. It's absurd. Look at your screen time. What do you mean you don't have time?
Yeah, we have plenty of time. We make time for what matters to us. So that part of, yes,
Facts.
take just the money part, take some money, put it aside because you want more money. So then you'll have more money if you do that.
But like your lifestyle doesn't change.
It might change a little bit. There might be a few things that you can't have a moment of retail therapy.
No, I'm telling you, it's actually like insane. Like it doesn't change.
Well, that's funny because that's what they say about tithing. That if you think you only have enough money and you can't make it, I make $1,000 a week and I need every penny of it to pay my bills. God wants you to give 10% back to Him the day you get it. Every time you get, if somebody gives you $100 in a Christmas card, give $10 to God. Everything that comes to you, and what He does is it doesn't change your life. Your ends meet. Your ends manage to meet.
Yeah, but I also just don't know how I feel about
similar.
that because it's like I've seen so much corruption.
Well, I think you have to be.
Even like charities, like
that was
charity,
so.
No, I know, but it's like I've seen like when I've made big donations to charities, and it's like you go and then you see how like it runs, and you're like, oh my god,
you do have to.
Why did I give money?
You have to be smart about that, but you still should be giving it back to God. That's the law. That's the biblical law, and the idea is that, like you said, your life doesn't change. You actually manage to make ends meet. So he was saying about things that he, new rules to follow, things he had to give up, things he had to do, and I find that I just don't want to do all the things that I used to do because I have this other sense of fulfillment. I don't need, I don't drink nearly as much as I was. Last week, I went out and I drank too much and I was dying because my tolerance is so down because I'm just not doing the things that I was. Yeah. And there's a fulfillment that comes with this that makes it okay to make sacrifices. And I think that's where, he's getting he's getting at here. It's okay.
Raising your kids as Muslims?
Well, you try, of course. I don't know, when you're really raised as a Muslim, I think it's a very difficult job, especially in these times. Of course, when I married, I wasn't a Muslim. You promise in a way that you raise your children as Christians. So after I became Muslim, I'm not raising my children as Christians, of course. If the kids have questions about Christianity, they ask my wife, they get Christian answers. And if they come to me, they get Islamic answers. But most of the time, she says, ask your father. And my wife cooks halal for everybody, so that's very sweet. She says, well, I'm not going to cook 5 meals, so everybody eats the same. You want halal, everybody eats halal. So in a way, it's like an organic process.
What was your heaviest?
That's not bad at all. Like halal, like from what I've seen, it's like just meat and not like killed in a horrible way.
Halal just means good. It's
Yeah.
the opposite of haram.
Like
So
I'll eat
whatever
halal.
their
Like
rules are.
can we get halal meat? Can you like?
I don't know anything about cooking in the Muslim religion. I will look it
Yeah,
up. Yes, I'll make you some Muslim food. I don't know what that means. Somebody send me some
A
recipes.
halal steak or something.
What's the difference between a halal steak?
Well, from what I saw with the 3 Muslims, like a big thing was like how they kill the animals.
Okay, right. So that's similar with kosher meat, I guess.
Yeah.
Not
But they said
necessarily
you
the
can
same
like
rules,
taste the difference when like an animal is raised in like a non-terrible way, not in a box with a million other things squishing next to it, and then it's killed with a gun to its head. You can literally taste it.
I would buy that, and there's actual scientific proof that it's different because they look at the fear
The stress-
hormones, and the stress
adrenochrome.
hormones that are released into the muscles before death, or are just in the muscles from their whole life of living hell. So yeah, that's a whole other conversation. I'd rather not eat meat. But I do.
Most regretful expression that you used for Islam?
I think Islam is a lie, because that's something I used to say. Islam is a lie, the Quran is poison. But when I said Islam is a lie, that's the whole religion and everything that comes with it. So that's like the highest level of jahiliyyah in a way. Yeah, that's something I regret, because it was like an umbrella and everything else was under this concept of Islam is a lie, because that was the core thought. And of course I do blame myself, and I know there are a lot of people out there not practicing Muslims that do so. And in a way I understand it, because in a political sense and in a social, cultural sense, everything is said and done is still there. I sometimes even hear arguments from people in my old party that I invented in a way. Yeah, that's something that bothers me, and that's one of the reasons that we founded an organization. It's called the IXC, Islam Experience Center, and we go to schools, primary school, high school, college, universities, but also to departments of the government, other social organizations, churches, to take away misconceptions about Islam, to share the message, to show Islam in its true colors. Right. And we do it by virtual reality with the glasses, so it's a very fun experience as well. And we try to erase in a way the things I said and done in the past.
How should people research about Islam? Do you advise just searching at Google?
No, I would certainly not advise Google. It's the last thing I would advise. I said shut down the computer. No, I think it's very important that people read books, real books with pages and stuff. I would recommend Muhammad, His Life Based on the Earlier Sources of Martin Links, the book I talked about earlier. It's a green book. And I think it's very important for people not just dive into the Quran, because it's a very complex book. And if you don't have anybody who can teach you what you read, especially most of the people who don't know anything about Islam are not fluent Arabic, classic Arabic speaking people. So you will read an interpretation of the Quran or a translation, and most of the time that's not the real deal, of course. So I would advise people just to study the Sīrah, study the character and the life of the Prophet, because that's what the tradition teaches us as well. His life was the Quran. He was the living Quran in a way. Just study his Sunnah, and I think that is the best way of discovering Islam.
What would you like to say as your final comments?
I became much more happy after I became Muslim. So I would like to invite everybody to become Muslim, just because it brings peace to your soul and peace to your heart. It is the truth. It resonates with heart and soul. At least look at it from an Islamic perspective. Try to read and study the life of the Prophet. Try to understand what the Muslims believe. Not so much the behavior of Muslims, because there are a lot of Muslims that don't live like Muslims, including myself. I don't. That's a really important point.
That is such an important point, because every time I hear either atheists or non-practicing Christians, crap on Christianity, they're talking about people. They're talking about the church, about institutions that have done wrong and gone astray. They're never really fully understanding the Bible and the teachings. It's never about that.
Yeah, no,
and
you're
that's
not
a really important thing that we should all learn about any religion. Look at the core of the religion, not its followers.
It's true.
We all do, but you should look at the example of all examples, and it was the prophet. And if you study his life, perhaps you find guidance that leads you to the truth.
I like that video.
That guy was very nice and chill.
It's a good story
Seems
too.
like a smart
I
guy.
really did like it because it is crazy, like coming from a Christian family to go to Muslim. It's like a big deal. Yeah, that was a solid video.
Yeah, it's got 3.5 million views. So I guess a lot of people agree with us that was a solid video.
I got a million DMs about
this
reacting to
particular video.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for everyone who sent it over. I have a whole bunch that I've received, a bunch of requests. Probably he's in there somewhere that I haven't even had the chance to look through. I got to just set aside an hour or two and just get into it. People are very generous with the knowledge that they're trying to share.
Like I've seen this thumbnal like a million times. But yeah. Sorry it took so long for me to even get to it.
There looks like there were some other good ones on that particular channel there.
Yeah.
Of similar stories.
Wow, that was a good video. All right.
Thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, follow me on Instagram at SonnyFaz. You got anything else to add? I'll give $100 to someone who follows my Instagram at SonnyFaz, and also make sure to follow my mom at Sonny's mother, or don't. Doesn't really matter.